This is Anne Byler, and today we are going to talk about the subject of fear. Now, it's normal for all of us to be afraid at times. It's like almost second nature. We're afraid of what tomorrow may bring. We're afraid of what may happen to us. We're afraid of what may happen to our family. We never know when the phone rings, what's going to happen. So I think it's normal for all of us to be afraid to some degree. But what I know is that if we live with fear, it can truly paralyze us. So let me just say, it's okay to be afraid, but let's not stay stuck in fear. The fear of the unknown, the fears that we face on a daily basis, possibly. I believe that one way that we can be less fearful and to deal with fear is to be honest with ourselves, with God, and with someone who we feel very safe with. So today we have someone with us, and I'm so excited that we have Yoli with us on on this interview, and why we believe that she is actually the perfect person to be discussing fear due to her firsthand battle with stage 3 breast cancer, and then how that she coped with it and how she managed fear during that time. So welcome, Yoli, and we're so happy to have you with us today.
Hi, Anne. Thank you so much for having me. And I think having an honest conversation about fear is a healthy thing to have. And it's an important conversation to have. So I feel blessed to be here with you to tackle this topic.
So can you tell us the story, what you went through, and during that time, did fear completely consume you for days on end, or were you able to manage it maybe from the start? Tell us all about it, please.
Sure, thank you. Well, my personal cancer story started 15 years ago when I first found my lump. It was on Thanksgiving Day, 2007. And I'll share a little bit about the backstory. When I was a child, my mom was diagnosed with cancer. So cancer has always been a part of my life, unfortunately, and lots of emotions tied to my mother's battle. So when I found my cancer, I knew in my heart of hearts that it was cancer, like no doubt about it. I remembered the sensations, the pain. I felt this mass and instantly became fearful. And I was getting out of the shower. I was drying up and felt this pain, put my hand right on my breast, and I felt it and knew. So what I did, which is what a lot of people do, is I stuffed that fear down because I knew I had people coming to my home. I had a turkey in the oven and I couldn't deal with the fear. So just kind of powered through that scary day and knew that I would have to go to the doctor. So I did the following week. Went and had an exam, and then fast forward had a mammogram, my very first one. And that was a whole scary thing in and of itself. But yeah, it was a very scary time to hear the words, "You have cancer." And yes, like you shared earlier, I did get diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer, and knew that I needed to start chemotherapy first to shrink down the cancer. I had a lot of cancer activity in my left breast, and then I had a double mastectomy, and then radiation and lots of surgeries, and then a preventative hysterectomy as well. So it was a roller coaster ride of about 2 years of cancer battling, fighting the cancer with treatment and surgery. But then life after cancer is a whole other ballgame, which we can talk about in just a little bit.
So because this was kind of part of your family history, was there an advantage to that, or was there a disadvantage? Like, because of that, were you more fearful, or did you think, okay, I know what this is all about, and I know we can overcome this. Can you talk to that? Speak to that.
Sure, definitely mixed feelings. The day that I had my mammogram, and ultrasound, I did not expect to hear the words, "You or they said, we're almost 100% certain you have cancer. I was ill prepared. I did not have anyone with me. I was alone. I thought I would have a few days to mentally prepare. So when they told me that and they gave me the screen, they said, here's the tumor, here's cancer. The first question out of my mouth was, am I going to die like my mom? And I started crying, bawling. And so to answer your question, it was a disadvantage because I immediately went to fear. I knew what it was like to go through cancer. I remember seeing my mother go through chemotherapy back in the 80s when chemotherapy was so harsh on your body and she was violently ill and radiation was just created lots of burns. And it was just such a scary time for my mom. I bless her heart. She fought so hard. My cancer treatments were cakewalk compared to hers. And so, I went to that state that I saw from a child's perspective. Immediately, I went to the Yoli childhood memory of seeing my mom battle it. And I was really scared. But then I remembered as I was trying to just settle into this new reality and trying to get dressed, because they sent me to a breast surgeon that very day. They said, we took the liberty of making an appointment for you and the doctor's waiting for you. One, I knew that it was not good news if they're sending me to the doctor. And then two, I needed to just get ready to leave this door. And I knew outside there were these women sitting, waiting for their mammograms. It's like, okay, I can't freak them out. So I have to just clean myself up. I need to just power through this, come out there, because I didn't want them to be scared as they're going in for their mammograms. So it was a roller coaster. Now, fast forward, after having gone through my cancer battle, my sister was diagnosed with metastatic cancer, and my lived experience was able to help her with her cancer battle as well. And I was able to provide resources and support at a level that only a cancer survivor could. So in that instance, it was a benefit to having gone through that crazy wild ride to be able to help somebody else. So mixed feelings. It truly is a roller coaster ride of emotions when you're diagnosed.
So truly, so fear, speaking about fear, you said at one point that you were thinking, oh, am I going to die? What was that like? I mean, the thought about dying, was that fearful, or did you immediately go to faith and say, it's going to be okay?
Yes, I got there eventually, and pretty quickly, actually. The part about dying for me, it wasn't the fact that I wasn't going to be here anymore. Like, the dying part is the easy part. It's like, I'm going to heaven. I know where I'm going if I die. I'm a Christian woman. I love the Lord. I've accepted the Lord in my heart. I know where I'm going. But the part that hurt my heart, the part that really drove whenever I was fearful, was what was going to happen to my family. My father had lost the love of his life to cancer. I was the youngest of 7 children. So, I just kept thinking about my dad. I just couldn't fathom the thought of him having to bury his baby daughter, his youngest daughter, to the same disease that took the love of his life. So, yes, it was scary. I knew that I saw my mom lose her battle. I don't even want to say lose, because she went to heaven too. But, she wasn't able to fight the cancer and keep it away. So I was scared from that perspective. But it also, I had my family to fight for. Then there was a moment where I did a mindset shift. It's like, okay, I know what I have. I know what the plan is. I know what I'm facing. It's go time. And that's when the fear shifted, the mindset shifted. And it was all about powering through and tapping into the faith and into my loved ones, and just trying to figure out and come up with those coping mechanisms to get through the dark days.
It sounds to me, Yoli, like you just described being mentally strong, emotionally strong. You shifted into a whole other world, a whole other gear, like almost, when you said you just went into this place of, I got to be strong for my family. I need to be emotionally healthy during this time. And, that sounds almost like is it even possible to be emotionally strong when you experience physical devastation? You get the bad news that something is very wrong here. I could die. Is it even possible to stay emotionally strong during that time? But I think you described that to a degree. And
but I want to share what I did. So It did take some work. It didn't come naturally. I wish it did. It would have made life so much easier. When I had my initial appointment with my breast surgeon, I knew that I needed to arm myself with information. I needed to understand what I was up against. And best thing that happened is she gave me this book. It's called The Breast Cancer Survivor Manual with Dr. John Link, that explained the process of going through breast cancer. And I read that book cover to cover the first night I had it. And then it got me looking into other, like learning more about nutrition and what could I do? The cancer was growing. It needed to be addressed with chemotherapy and radiation and surgeries, all those things. But what could I do to help myself, help my body? And so I really spent a significant amount of time educating myself about what I could do. And then, so that's part one. Part two, then it was really truly leaning into the faith, right? Having that dialogue with the Lord. It's like, okay, Lord, this is what I'm having to deal with. There's nothing I can't get through without you. It says so in the Bible. So please just even guide my thoughts, guide the doctors, help me figure out how to navigate, and just really lean into it. You mentioned something earlier when in the introduction about, addressing the fear and not letting it paralyze you. And it's so easy to do if you just kind of let it consume you. There really is a process in which you're traveling through, and you just kind of power through it. It doesn't come easily. And for me, I had to make conscious decisions to be brave, even though I was fearful. It's a dichotomy. You can be brave, but be scared at the same time.
So well said, Yoli. Thank you for that. So it is possible to experience emotional wellness in the face of great physical illness or injury or difficulty. And, so we are created body, soul, and spirit. When we're in emotional distress during a physical issue, it can really break us down more physically and emotionally. So for you to be able to pick up and say, pause for a moment, look at everything realistically, facing your fear, and then deciding, I want to be strong. So I love what you've shared there, because it gives all of us hope to know that we can actually be emotionally strong during very devastating physical issues in our body. Am I saying that correctly?
Absolutely. You nailed it. And, I have a lot of folks have asked me during the last 15 years of going through cancer, what do I tell my loved one, when they're going through this, or, what are some things I shouldn't say? And I always give the advice of, it's okay to acknowledge that cancer stinks, or, any situation that you're in, that it's okay to say it is awful. One thing that I remember when I was battling cancer, people used to say, you have such an inspirational story, and which I appreciated so much. But I also benefited when people would just say, I know this is a dark period for you, and let's acknowledge that. I know you have dark days, even though you smile and you power through it. And there's something very human and just relatable when you can say, I see that is scary, and I get you. It's okay to acknowledge that life can be fearful, that we can be scared.
I think that's really great advice for anyone experiencing a life-altering event such as cancer or any extreme illness. It's just to simply, I think as human beings, we want to go to one extreme or the other. Like we can either ignore it, like say, oh, I'm fine, no worries, no problem, I'll get through this. Then there's the other extreme that we can just totally be silent, and we don't want to talk about it. But what I think you described is that it's okay to acknowledge that, I'm having a rough day. What I'm experiencing right now is really not okay. I don't feel good. It's stressful for me. It's hard on my family. It's hard on me personally. But to be able to acknowledge our feelings is really a very healthy thing to do.
Absolutely.
These very difficult physical issues in our lives.
Yeah, and sometimes the words don't come out, right? So I always give the advice, like try to find the one thing that you feel you could de-stress. Like for me, it's hiking. I can hike my heart out on a hill, get lost in my own head, and get lost in my conversations with the Lord on the hills. And sometimes I don't have words. I just sweat it out on the hill. For some people, it's like listening to music or journaling or having coffee with your friend, like just try to find those ways to cope and de-stress, get that heaviness out of your heart. And that in and of itself can be such a healing activity. Finding those activities is so important.
I think what you've just described, Yoli, is that instead of laying in bed and feeling like the world is caving in on us and the sky is falling down and there's no hope for the future, which is honestly the natural response, right? That most of us can experience in times of great difficulty, in times of tragedy, trauma, bad news. But what you have really described to us is that, do something. If you can, if you're physically impaired and you cannot get out of bed, of course, that's a different story. That's a whole other subject. But what you encourage all of us to do is, do something that can make you feel well, feel better. And I feel like that then adds to your emotional wellness. So thank you so much for sharing that story with us. You really have inspired us, and we're blessed to have you here with us today.
Thank you. I do want to say, though, that sometimes there are those days when you just want to be in your pajamas all day and just hide under your blankets. And I think that's okay too. I used to always tell my family or my friends, like, okay, you guys, just allow me this one day of a pity party because I just need to cry it out, or I just need to feel sorry for myself for just a second. But I promise you tomorrow I'm going to get up, shake it off, and I'll be better. But it's okay to allow yourself that time to just feel it, lean into it.
Well, you've described very well the emotional part of who we are. God made us. He created us as with emotions. We are emotional beings. And you have really spoken to that subject very well, meaning like in any given day, you can feel sad, you can feel mad, you can feel self-pity, you can be sorry for yourself. There's all of these things that we feel. And you're not judging us for feeling that way. But there is there are things that we can do to be emotionally well. And I feel like learning how to describe our emotions is really important. And, I was later in life, I discovered that I was actually an emotional being. It was through the experience that we had of losing our own child. And honestly, at that time, I never would have been able to talk about my emotions. Like that was never back maybe 30, 40 years ago. That was never talked about. And so when our daughter was killed, I probably did the opposite of what you've done with your experience with cancer. I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't know it was okay to cry in public. I didn't know it was okay to like really describe, or at least even try to describe, which you mentioned a minute ago. You don't always know what to say.
Right.
You may feel like you don't have the vocabulary to say what you're feeling, because it's really too deep sometimes for words.
It is.
But you tried. At least you tried to express what you're feeling. And so my own experience with trauma and tragedy in my own life was that I did not understand that I was an emotional being until I was in my late 40s, early 50s. Can you imagine that? So I want to tell our viewers and our listeners, we're emotional beings, and begin to try to put to words, what you're feeling, and find someone that can actually help you talk through the illness, the tragedy, or the trauma. But because I was not able to talk about my feelings, my deep feelings of grief at that time, I isolated myself, and I just became very fearful. I didn't want to live. I didn't want to live for tomorrow. I became isolated in this place of almost, I want to say, emotionally in a fetal position. Even though I kept moving every day, I lived life as if nothing ever happened, but I continued to die just a little bit inside every day. No one noticed. I never expressed my feelings, my fear of what I was feeling during that time. So what you did, at least trying to express how you felt is so, so very important. And to cope with fear, I hope that our listeners heard what you had to say, because it's really important to be able to talk about what you've experienced.
Thank you, Anne. I do want to share that I'm so sorry for your loss, and the words that you just shared right now about the grief, the loss of words, the isolation. I can relate to that, because as strong as I think I was during my cancer battle, 8 years into my survival, my sister passed away from metastatic breast cancer. And when she passed, I felt like I wish I could just go through cancer a million times and handle it on my own, than seeing my own loved one go through that. And then she died, she passed away. And then I was so left like, oh my gosh, what just happened? And when you're in the thick of it, when I was helping her with her medical care, I didn't even have time to address my feelings around it. So when she passed and everything just settled down, and then people that were in and out of my home all kind of went away, and I was just in my own skin, then it was like, whoa, what is this dark feeling I'm feeling right now? Survivor guilt. I did isolate myself. I didn't want to be around people. And all of a sudden I was in this grief state that I never really understood until I lost my sister. Even though I lost my mom, kids are resilient, power through it. But as an adult and as a cancer survivor, losing my sister to the same disease, but I'm still here, it just didn't seem fair. And it's just such a difficult time. But again, I circle back to this shift. Like it does take a significant amount of effort to share your story like you just did, Anne, and making yourself vulnerable to say the words, I'm hurting right now, and then try to figure out how to power through, and hopefully surround yourself with the tribe that can help you power through, and just kind of lean into the friendships, the love, and allow love to seep in, because sometimes we resist it when we're not in a good headspace.
Well, I'm really sorry, Yoli, about your loss of your mom and your sister.
Thank you.
And then you were faced with the very same thing. I cannot imagine experiencing all of that. I can't imagine fear wanting to just completely overtake you. Did that happen?
Right. It was a roller coaster ride. The grief roller coaster ride is such a different beast. And I don't think it's hard to describe grief as fear, because I think I was beyond the fear at that point. I was mad. I was sad and heartbroken. And I knew that I could, it was a very slippery slope, that I could very easily fall into depression. And, again, going into my faith life, my prayers, like, okay, I'm still here, Lord. Like I didn't lose my life. I'm still here. What can I do now? Put me to work, because I need to figure out something. I need to figure out what my purpose is now. Mm-hmm. And, like what you're doing, Anne, in helping others overcome fear, sharing your story. It's a level of vulnerability that we're leaning into, you and I, and having experienced loss, but as an act of service to support others. And when you're serving others, all of a sudden you're outside of your problem, where you can just really lean into that and just realize that we're all in this crazy life together. And what can we do to support one another?
Well, so, my own story and what you've just described, I feel like the fear really wants to take us into isolation. And that's when you're consumed with it, and when you're frozen and paralyzed with fear, you really find yourself isolating yourself. You do it maybe not subconsciously. You're not just saying, okay, I'm just going to isolate myself. I'm going to stay in my bedroom, watch TV all day. I just can't socialize with my friends. I don't want to be out there. It's not like you plan to do that, but it's what happened to me. And it's because the isolation, the fear took me into isolation. And then I felt comfortable over time. I really felt comfortable in my isolation. I want to say emotionally. I still went to church. I still had my family activities. I still did what I had to do. But in my head and in my heart, I was completely isolated. I was detached emotionally. And, I love a quote by Dr. Richard Dobbins, a psychiatrist that helped me tremendously through my stuff. And that was, he said, alone we die, connected we live. And God created us to connect. Even in our worst days, even when we want to be isolated, we don't want anyone around us because we can't bear the depth of our pain. It's too hard. We want to go away and just be safe all by ourselves somewhere. But God created us as human beings to connect one with another. And over time, I was able to understand I have to connect. It took me a while. I stayed in this isolation position for about 7 years where I isolated myself.
It can be a comfy little place for a moment. And then, like you said, it really can suck you right in. I'm so proud of you, just knowing that you've got help. Like, I think there's something to that. I would love for you to share a little bit more about, what compelled you to seek help when you were going through this.
What compelled me is a great word. It compelled me because, Yoli, I was so sick of feeling alone. I was so tired of fighting this battle. I weighed 92 pounds and I was becoming more angry. And I think that fear, it's not only fear that you feel, but then all these other emotions really kind of come along with that. And one of them for sure for me was fear and depression. And I got so tired and weary of the journey. It was like an uphill battle every day. Like I'm pushing, I don't know if everyone knows what a wheelbarrow is, but I grew up on the farm. I know what a wheelbarrow is. It's like I'm pushing this, up a hill to the point where I was completely a shell. And what really encouraged me, what really inspired me to kind of just move on with life was the hardest thing I ever did in my life was to, during all those 7 years after our daughter was killed, I went to my pastor for help 5 months after she was killed. And he took advantage of me. And I was in a over 6 year long sexually abusive relationship. And it was during that time that I truly wanted to completely isolate myself. But it was all about fear. I was afraid that I would never be able to get out of this relationship. But what inspired me was I got so tired of feeling bad and angry and sick in my stomach, really physically. It had a physical reaction. I had a physical reaction. I felt like I was falling apart from the inside out. One day I was so done, so afraid. I went and told my husband what was going on in my life. And I call it the power of confession. I talk about transparency and how that transformed my life initially, but then over time, I was able to come out of this isolated feeling. I was able to put fear behind me, and in its place, I began to live again. And I call it the free indeed life.
Wow. And it all started by opening up. When I hear people say, you're allowing yourself to be vulnerable, but there's so much strength in that. It's like, it's liberating. It's like you're breaking out of this dark, heavy shell. It's like, okay, let's face this. Let's go for it. I know it sounds easy. No, it wasn't. Oh my gosh, like your life story is just so much. But here we are, 7 years later.
Here we are. It takes a lot of work on our part as far as overcoming fear, right? There's something that we have to do. It's not like a supernatural miracle from heaven that one day, boom, here we go. I am freeless. I am fearless. No, it's a process that I went through, and I'm sure
and we're still going through.
That's exactly right. But one thing I have learned, Yoli, that is that fear is constantly, it grips you. It brings you in, it pulls you in, it sucks you down. But when you begin to just simply talk about what you're afraid of, what's going on in your life, I love the word, it liberates you over time. And we have just come through almost 2 years with the pandemic. So I feel like a lot of people can relate to the subject of fear because all of us, lay in bed at night, right? We think about this. What's going to happen tomorrow? What's going to happen with our world? What about my family? How will God provide for us, take care of us? And I just feel like the pandemic has what's the word? It has just completely engulfed many people with fear. And the pandemic has really escalated our fear in many, many ways. So talk to me a little bit about that. How did you overcome that?
Sure. Well, when I talk about COVID and cancer, my world is cancer. When I talk about that, it's like, oh my gosh, COVID exacerbated all the emotions that we feel as cancer patients and survivors. It just made it a million times worse. And, I had been using the term the new normal way before the pandemic. And, I had an AmeriCorps who helped me during our first year of operations. And she's also a breast cancer survivor. And she said, once you hear the words or you go to the trauma of cancer or just life trauma, there's like a loss of innocence where you can't go back to the person you were. But there's something awesome that could happen when you recognize that and accept that. Like for us in the pandemic, it's almost like there's a loss of innocence. We can't go back to the lives that we had. Even when things start opening up 100%, having gone through something like a pandemic is life-changing. So many people lost their businesses or their livelihood. So many people lost their lives. There's so much tragedy that came from this that there is a loss of innocence. So now it's like, okay, how do we learn to move forward, to live life after having gone through something like this? And it's hard. Like for the cancer community, there's so much isolation already when cancer just kind of consumes you, or having suffered loss of a loved one like you did, Anne, you're just in the shell. So throwing in a pandemic where you literally physically can't connect with people, can't hug them. Oh my gosh, it did affect our cancer community tremendously. And for me, as the leader of a nonprofit that addresses emotional health the emotional well-being after diagnosis, for me, I went into reaction, okay, how do we solve this problem of isolation using what we have? And that's when we really lean on to technology, like what you and I are doing right now on the Zoom, sitting in this chair right here in my dining room, figuring out ways to support the cancer community through the use of technology. There are workarounds. We can figure out how to connect. And it hasn't been easy, but there's still so much more that we can do to support each other as we continue to power through the pandemic.
Great words, great encouragement, Yoli. I'm telling you, this fear subject, we have just kind of touched the surface of it, right? It's deep in human behavior. It's deep. But you know what? It's as easy, I shouldn't say easy, but what we can do is we can find our way out of fear by what you just talked about, being able to talk to one another, be real with one another, and just say, hey, listen, I hear you, I see you, I'm here. And I think that's what all of us can do during this time and during this time of the pandemic, but even in times of when people come to us with great issues, great trauma, great fear, great physical problems. So I just want to thank you, Yoli, for being here to discuss all of this with us. You've been so vulnerable, and I'm so happy that we were able to get your perspective on fear as you face it firsthand.
Thank you. What a pleasure to get to know you and hear your story. I'm so inspired by you. And yes, we could talk about this all day long. We can go down different paths related to fear, but really there's a lot that we can do to take back control. Doesn't mean that fear goes away completely. It doesn't. I'm scared. 15 years later, I still get scan anxiety when I have to go in for my test. Will it come back? who knows? So quick side story, I have lots of little side stories, but when I was going through cancer and I lost my sister, I was in a pedestrian accident soon after. And it's like, you don't know what life is going to throw your way. Sometimes it is so utterly ridiculous what happens to us in life. It's just like, how do you continue? Just find ways to dust yourself off and keep going, whatever that is. There are ways to cope and navigate.
One thing that I learned through all of my experiences in life, Yoli, is a one-liner that I love. It doesn't answer all the questions, but it's what centers me, and that is that life is hard. God is good.
Thank you.
God is good. Don't confuse the two. Life is hard. God is good. Don't confuse the two. So I just want to say thank you, Yoli, so much. And I want to thank you so much, everyone who has followed along for our entire emotional wellness series for the month of October. Don't forget to comment on this video and you'll be entered to win a free personalized book from me. Winners will be announced this Friday. And please see the attached slide for mental health resources. Thank you, Yoli, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Interviews on our podcast. God bless you all.